Well, thank you all for having me, and Bishop, thank you to you for everything that you've done and shifting towards this model. And it's fun for me to get to come and share a little bit of what we've done. And I want to start with a text that probably most of us have heard just recently from Acts chapter 2, just a single verse, Acts 2, verse 12, which says, "All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, 'What does this mean?'" What does this mean? And I feel like that's a question probably most of us come with today. We might be starting to get some sense, but still a lot of question out there. So we're asking the question in this moment of what does it mean to be asked to lead a cooperative parish? And if we're honest, we all also bring those questions of what does it mean where we are as the church right now? What does it mean in this post-COVID new reality and with General Conference coming up and changes on the table and struggles in our church? What does it mean for us as pastors to live into that? There's just so much. So I'm hoping today in our time together that I can share with you some specifics that'll be helpful, share some parts of my journey through creating a cooperative parish and recognize that every situation is different. You know, we were talking yesterday and one of the things that I think can be such a gift with the parish model is that every single one is going to look different. So if you're saying, I'm not sure how this is going to fit our setting, it may fit your setting differently, but that's the beauty of it. There's so much flexibility in the way that it comes together. But I want to back up for just a minute and give you a little bit of my story. I think there are probably some pieces in that you'll be able to relate to. So I have been in parish ministry for 20 years. I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., and then moved to North Carolina to go to college at Wake Forest University and then went to seminary at Duke. And, you know, at that point, if you had asked me where I would be in ministry at this point, this would not have been it. This would
Where did
not.
you go to school?
I went to Wake Forest undergrad and then Duke,
And then where did you go to seminary?
Duke, Duke,
What? Say that one more time.
Duke.
Duke. Is it Duke University? That's great.
Yes, yes, the excellent North Carolina school. So yes, and you know when I came out of there, I never would have pictured this. I always thought that I would do sort of what was I don't know normal at that time in terms of ministry. But I came out of Duke. I went to England for a year. I had done some crazy field eds in my time at Duke and been all over the world and not really done a whole lot of parish ministry, if I'm honest. And so I went to England for a year sort of to practice. And that was my first experience both with rural ministry and also with any sort of multi church setting. So I was out in southwestern England, a real rural area with 8 churches on a circuit. And so that was my first experience really in the local church doing ministry and seeing the ways that the churches came together and shared resources and shared preachers. And we had retired Anglican priests and lay speakers and local pastors and everybody else kind of stepping in. But that was just a cute year in England. And then I came back and started the journey that I thought would be sort of real ministry and started the way that's pretty typical in our conference. I was an associate at a larger church and then went from there to my first station church. And then every appointment was a little bit bigger than the last one. And I just sort of thought I was moving forward the way that I expected that I would, and that ministry was sort of progressing. And then 6 years ago, I got the call that I was being appointed to a 2 point charge in East Bend, North Carolina, where there is not much but cows, still some tobacco, other farming, small family churches. And I had to ask, God, why am I here? Why am I being sent here? And you know, if I'm honest about it, I was even asking the question, is this punishment? Is there something that I have done wrong along the way to be sent here? And so I share a little bit of my story to say I recognize that a lot of us, when we started in ministry, are not where we thought we might be. The world has changed, the church has changed. God has called us to different places and to different times. But, friends, even in that, God calls us to amazing things. And where I've ended up is Not at all what I would have thought. But at this point in my journey, it is, I know, I'm confident, it is where God's called me to be. And there's beauty in that. And you are on this call today because the bishop has seen the fruit that you have to offer. Your district superintendent has recognized the leadership skills that you bring to the table. And now we have the chance to kind of figure that out together. So I know that we're dealing with shortages in clergy and struggle in churches and all of these difficult things. And I started out in much the same. When I got to East Bend, the total population of East Bend as of the 2020 census is 739 people. 739 people in East Bend proper. And there are 7 United Methodist churches and a total of 17 churches in that community. Any of us can do that math and know that something's going to be a struggle. And then got in, and the churches, they didn't have budgets. And once we did budgets, the news wasn't good. And the community was so different from any place I'd ever served. I really had to go in and just listen to the people. I couldn't relate to their backgrounds in a lot of ways. They had very different life experiences than me, different family situations, different upbringings. But what it forced me to do was to go in and to listen really carefully. And I recognized as time went on that I was becoming a better listener than I probably had been in any of my other appointments up to that point. And so as I listened, there were certain common themes as people began to trust me more that came out. And there were the folks were scared. They were scared about the future. When I dug into that, I discovered that a lot of that fear was rooted in a United Methodist congregation in that community that had been closed by the conference a number of years before. And all of the churches were afraid they were going to be next. And so the level of mistrust with leadership was high. The fears about the future were there. And it really had become a burden to them in even being able to go step out in ministry. But I also saw some really good things in those churches because there were folks who truly loved the Lord, who wanted to serve faithfully, even when they couldn't figure out quite what that would look like. The desire was there. And there's also a willingness to work together between the churches. The lay leaders had already come together across the 7 United Methodist churches. And we're starting to create what they call East Bend United, a group of lay people who love the Lord and who wanted to serve East Bend, who wanted to serve in the community. And they were beginning the visioning of what that might look like. And so that was coming together and was just a really practical way that we could step into further ministry together. Um, and so as time went on, it was just clear that this model was not going to be able to continue. We're having some of the clergy shortages that you all are struggling with as well. We were seeing the numbers, the writing on the wall with the finances. And I just started asking questions. I thought about my time in England, and I remembered the way that with 8 churches, it was myself and sort of kind of my boss. They called it a superintendent, but over the 2 of us, and then all sorts of other people stepping in to help and to make ministry happen. Each church had their own identity and they maintained that, but they also shared a lot. And so it was a chance to think about the experiences I'd had there. And also one piece we were gifted with that I know that you all do not have, but we were gifted with some time. There was a pastor serving just up the road from me that I was friends with, and she was serving 2 other of the 7 churches in East Bend. And so we started talking about what might it look like if these 4 churches came in ministry in a more intentional way. And Doris asked me when we first started talking, what are the books that I've read? What are the resources that I went to? What are sort of the step 1, step 2, step 3 plans that we put into place? And there's some of that. But I just want to encourage all of you all that really more than anything else, it was listening to the people. It was paying attention in the community. It was integration. I'd done my undergraduate was in religion and elementary education. And so I've always been just really practical minded. And so it was understanding and paying attention to what people were thinking and digging deeper in their questions, what really mattered to them, what were the needs in the community that the churches might be able to reach together. And it was just trusting God. It was allowing the Holy Spirit to come into those conversations and to just move forward, to trust the little nudgings of something that might be the Spirit indicating that there was a door opening or a heart willing, and just going there. And friends, the love in that place and the desire to move forward as a faithful church just left me saying there has to be a better way than leaving all of these little churches struggling until they just fizzle out and die. And so that was really how we embarked on this. What does this mean? What could a next step look like? And it meant a lot of communicating. It meant patience and more patience and more patience. Sometimes it meant frustrating days when folks just didn't seem to get it. And it seemed so clear to me. It was answering questions in the Walmart parking lot and having someone come up behind me in a department store while I'm shopping for a bathing suit and answering the questions there, and being patient when it's the stall next to me in the bathroom and the questions start coming. But trying to answer questions and quelling fears were a huge part for me of getting going. And also sharing with folks that our goal was not to close churches. Now, as pastors, we all know, as district superintendents, we recognize sometimes that happens. And I also know that there's still that potential on the table for us. But it's not our goal going into a cooperative parish to say, we're going to get everybody merged into one church, close all the little ones. So for our folks, it actually decreased their anxiety. As they started to understand, the anxiety levels went down, the comfort went up, and they just were able to relax a little bit. And a couple nuts and bolts, I'll talk more about this in a bit, but I essentially work like a senior pastor. I've got 2 part-time local pastors who are with me, and between the 3 of us, we cover everything. And, it's about recognizing the gifts that other people bring to the table and also the gifts that the churches bring. And a quick story that I'll share with you. One of the smallest churches had always been the smallest of the 2 on a charge, and had always sort of been the one that didn't really feel like they had enough to offer and always had to lean on another church to sort of bail them out. We were wondering what the gifts were that they brought to the parish. And then COVID hit. And friends, that picturesque little church out in the country had a beautiful flat parking lot and this gorgeous old oak tree that provided just tons of shade. And so for 18 months, that church became our host site for our parish worship service, in person all the way through COVID. That was the only service we offered. And suddenly those people realized we have something to offer too. So I'd encourage you, and we'll talk some more about it, but to be thinking, what does each church have to offer? They do have gifts. Sometimes they may be strange gifts, but they do have gifts to offer. And it is our challenge as leaders to help them live into those gifts. And then, like the bishop was saying, we just got to get in and try it. We trust God. We open our hearts to the Holy Spirit. We say, some things may be hard, will be hard. There will be challenges. Sometimes we'll fail, but then we'll get right back on and try something else. And with our folks, we just move forward, trusting that God does desire for us to serve faithfully in our communities and for our communities to be about making disciples in the world. in navigating the council. For us, I guess one of the difficulties was just getting everybody to understand what we were buying into and what that meant for each local church, that each local church wasn't losing any of their identity or their power or any of that, but that we were just coming together in a new way. In terms of the council piece, that really it wasn't that hard in our setting because, as I said, I had already been with two of the churches for 3 years, and I knew some of the key leaders in some of the other churches. So that certainly helped. We had to make really clear that we weren't trying to leave anyone out, but also to have the right people at the table and have the most supportive voices, I guess we could say. So we all know what that means, and making sure that that came out in the way that would be most helpful for moving forward. But our fix really fell into line in terms of the leadership component. Our churches are all small enough that many of you will probably experience this. You have just a small handful of people who are the real doers. And so it gave us a chance to bring the doers together. And they've really thrived in doing with the other doers and supporting together. So that part has been helpful. I think probably the biggest endeavor we have ventured on is what's our summer literacy camp. And that's a 6-week program for children in our community who are behind in their reading in school. It's run through the Duke Endowment, so we're working in tandem with Duke Endowment folks. So there's the actual testing and working with the school systems and things like that. We work all 7 churches in East Bend together on that, and the parish coming together was a huge part of folks being able to see what we can accomplish when we work together. Uh, in terms of determining where the program would be located, they were willing to ask the very practical questions of which site would be the best for this particular ministry. And so they chose the church that was walking distance to the library and down the street from where they're building a community playground. And everybody was able to come behind that and leave the doors of their church for the sake of the children in the community. And it's been a beautiful thing to see. Just this past week, there was a training Thursday night for folks that wanted to participate. And I had a woman reach out to me from one of my other churches who just said, "What time is the training? I plan to go." And I almost broke down and cried because that same woman had looked at me when we were creating the cooperative parish. We had district staff out at their local church kind of going through everything. And she had looked at me and said, "We ain't no corporation and I'm not going anywhere. This is my church and I'm going to be here." First, we had to clarify that a corporation and a cooperation are two very different things. But for her to be the one to say, "I'd like to serve this summer. And which church is the training at? And what time do I need to be there?" Was just powerful. So sometimes it's been just recognizing when one person or one small group has been willing to make the shift. It's not night and day. It's small victories, but ones that can be life transforming. This woman is now committing to spending time this summer one on one, working as a reading buddy, helping a child who needs the love, who needs the consistent meals offered, and all of the rest for the sake of the kingdom. And she was willing to leave her building to do it. And that's just been such a beautiful thing to be a part of. One of the things we looked at was the frequency of meetings happening in the local church. And so if there were some meetings, one of my churches, council met every month, even if there was nothing to do. And so as the parish was starting, we also decreased some of those meetings from the practical side. Now, you certainly don't want to leave business undone, but if some things can shift in the way that they meet, or if there are meetings that could be stacked so that you're not asking people to come out more than once, or Zoom back to back, depending on kind of what your structures are there. But to recognize the time that people are giving to it, and to find creative ways to honor that, I think would be one way. And then also, it's certainly, you want folks in that group who are excited about the visioning component of it. And so if they're buying into it, if you're even saying, just give me a chance, give us a chance, and hang with it for a year and see what you think, or whatever, then hopefully you can get people on board, and it's not just another meeting. They're the folks that are there to help you vision and to help you create and to help you discern the Spirit of God. Another option in the interim, or sort of helping you shift towards a longer term goal of more of the leadership being concentrated in the parish, might be, and I don't know if you all do this much, but might be a single board model leadership in your church. So one of our churches, we had shifted to single board before we moved into the parish, and that was also very helpful. If you're in these little churches, especially where you still have all the separate committees, but it's all the same people or their spouses, it might be something to explore, not in the next 2 months, but maybe as you're looking for leadership for 2023, if concentrating that church's individual leadership into a single board could help them function more effectively, and also cut down on kind of the meetings and the outside pieces that they need to be responsible for. And friends, the reality is, we all know that we feel the most fulfilled and we are the most effective serving as pastors in ministry and as people when we are serving out of the areas of our own giftedness, when we're able to share our gifts in whatever ministry setting it is in a way that feeds our souls and can bless others and multiply disciples. What are the things that bring you joy? So if, for example, preaching is one of those for you, I would suspect it probably is for most of us as we're on this call. But how might that expand in the parish setting? If you have a church or churches that have been listed that the pastor will be covered by the parish, would you be able to preach another service on Sunday mornings? Could things shift in some ways to make that possible? Maybe you find a way in leading a lectionary group for the other pastors in your parish, or discipling a newer pastor, or a lay pastor who feels called to serve. Are there ways that you could do that? What is your particular preaching style? I think that's one that sometimes we don't stop and pay enough heed to. Now, some of you all, I also recognize there are differences in language and things that absolutely need to be factored into the way that preaching is covered in your setting, but also even just down to style. One of my associates is what we would say just a much more Baptist style preacher. And one of my churches really appreciates that style of preaching. And so he does most of the preaching there. He shares some other gifts across the parish, but he's the best fit for that place. So what might be the places that are the best fit for you to step into other things? And then worship leadership and planning. Someone can step in and help lead worship who might not be the same person who's offering the preaching component. Now, for us, I have two part-time folks who are working with me. One of them's my husband, and the other one is my youth and my person I was just referring to. Uh, and so I do a lot of the worship planning. I coordinate the worship services at 3 out of our 4 churches every week. But I'm not necessarily the one who's there and leading them, but I am the one who communicates with their volunteer organist or music, paid music staff, other volunteers who are helping. I make sure that the communion stewards know when they need to do communion and all those kinds of things, so that on Sunday, whoever's leading, it's ready for them. We certainly talk about themes and scriptures and all of that, but that kind of helps them know what they're stepping into. And then the community involvement, I feel like we've touched on pretty well already. What are those ways that maybe you're already involved in that local community. What are outreach passions that you have or particular gifts that you have to bring? Do you have a background or love for working with community children or folks who've been incarcerated or whatever it might be? And how might that love of yours benefit the larger kingdom building in your parish? And then I want to say a couple words about pastoral care and counseling and kind of the visitation component. I know that a lot of y'all are in settings where you're already there and essentially being asked to kind of cover more. And I would encourage you to do everything you can to comfort and support the folks that you've already been with who might be saying, "Wait a minute, but we pay you full time. Why aren't we going to get you full time anymore? Who's going to take care of us?" And I've come to discover, at least for me, a lot of times whatever the question is, what they really mean is who's going to take care of me. So I would encourage y'all as you're looking at the creation of your parishes, especially if you've got some of those churches where there's not someone assigned, how can you get the coverage taken care of where there so that the 1st of July, God forbid, someone dies or there's a pastoral emergency, they need to know who to call. So I'd put that pretty high on the to-do list. And I also want to say, if that pastoral care component is something that just feeds your soul, then make sure that you have the opportunity to do that in a way that allows you to share those gifts in your setting and maybe even also benefits other churches in your parish beyond the particular church or churches that you've been appointed to. And I know we had some questions yesterday, and I was on one of the district Zooms last week with people saying, well, my church wants to know how much of my time they're going to get now. And I would encourage you to try to stay away from answering those questions in specifics and instead live it out, caring for your people. I'll give a quick example. About 3 weeks ago, my council chair and my main doer, as we were saying earlier, in one of my churches had a heart attack and died suddenly. And he was well known in the community across all of the churches. None of my other churches reached out to me that week for anything. They knew that my work and my ministry in that moment in time needed to be focused on James' family and on that particular local church and the grief that they were navigating. And so hours didn't matter. When I go to the hospital, I'm not thinking about which church is represented. I'm going and caring for the people who are there. And in time, they've seen that they are cared for in a way that I think has helped decrease the anxiety and allow for some of the openness. So use your gifts in those areas. Find ways that you can connect. Another one we also share across the parish geographically. I live 30 minutes from where my churches are located, and I also live closer to both of the main hospitals in the area. So we've played it up from the beginning. If you end up at Baptist or Forsyth, Lauren can be there in 10 minutes. Now, my associate lives in the parsonage in East Bend. He can be at the local hospital much more quickly. So again, they could have been saying, I'm not located close, it's a problem, but we've played up the parts that are positive. And so find ways that you're able to do that. The evangelism piece, I think the bishop has spoken of that well. If you have particular passions in that area, please find ways that you can mentor and lead others in that. And, I'll share a quick story. We had one of the things I created, but not so successfully, if you've looked, is our website. I created a great website in the beginning, and I've just not been able to maintain it. That's not one of my skill sets. But the biggest blessing that's come out of our website that we know of is I had a gentleman contact me through the website and ask if I thought that he and his husband would be accepted in any of our churches. And I was able to respond to him and to share which church I thought would probably be the best fit in our small rural community that would have an openness potentially for a same-sex couple to engage in ministry. And they are powerful additions to our church community. They have been a great part. My 80-something-year-old pianist now regularly asks that Andy play instead of her. And it has been a gift to watch unfold by doing evangelism in different sort of ways. Administration and finances, I'll just sort of throw that out there. Some of us love to do administration. I am one of those people. I do not love to do finance. I hired my husband to do that part. So we keep that delineated. And then, justice and equality and global mission sorts of pieces, I want to throw that out because sometimes I know we feel like we're at a disconnect with our churches, or maybe even with some of the other pastors that we serve with. But the cooperative parish model, in its best sense, can provide a place where you can find that partner in crime, where you can find a friend, where you can find a group of lay people, maybe not in the church you serve primarily, but maybe in the church down the street or in the next town over, that are passionate about the same things that you are. So if that's an area that's just your heart language, then find other people to come along with you on that journey. And then there are all sorts of specialized ministries, youth and children, senior ministries, music ministries. Friends, if you bring those gifts, let them be utilized in the parish. If you are already leading a successful youth group, for example, in your church, maybe some of the other churches would love to have an opportunity to be a part of that. Or if none of your churches have enough young people to have their own ministry, maybe that's something that could happen together. And if it's something you're passionate about, then maybe it's something that you could help lead. And then, I mentioned a couple others down there. Some folks really like to do problem solving and troubleshooting. That may often be some of your strong laity. They know the communities, they know the people. Let them help you succeed in that. And then I had to end with the thing that we all love and all strive to hear daily is people pouring in our doors saying, but we've always, whatever it is, right? Friends, we're going to hear it. And it takes patience to navigate it. But there are joys in this journey. Hopefully, most of us can identify our areas of great joy pretty easily. So I'm going to move on. Tell a quick story. One day last week, I walked out my front door, and my neighbors were having a tree cut down. And this wasn't just a regular tree. This was this massive tree that towered way over their house, that hung over their swimming pool, that behind that hung over the main road. And way up in that tree, there was a guy, and I could tell it was a guy. I could hear him shouting occasionally. There was a guy up there bracing each branch and gleefully cutting down that tree. And I looked at my daughter and I said, not for all the tea in China. You would never get me climbing that tree up at those heights doing that job. But then as I thought about it, for the guy who was up there, this was like Christmas. He was loving what he was doing. You could hear it in his voice when he'd shout out, down below. He was getting to live into the thing that just fed his soul. And so if I can encourage you in one thing moving forward, as you're starting to meet with the other pastors that you're going to be serving with, as you're starting to identify those key lay people, it is your blessing and your responsibility to be identifying the gifts that other people bring to the table. And that to me is a critical part of what we have the chance to do. But by beginning this discernment process of the gifts that people bring, then you have the chance to also clarify for your churches how those gifts can and are being utilized for the benefit of everyone. And I will say it's, I think, earned us some bonus points to play up the pastoral care part. There are 3 pastors now instead of 1. There will always be someone who can be there for you. I had mentioned that my husband covers our finance stuff. That's helpful if you have someone that's a good go-to person for people to know where they can get some help on that. For us, what it's meant as we ended up in COVID, he was able to apply for PPP loans and do a lot of the like technical paperwork that we just didn't have anybody else who had the skill set to do that. So the whole parish has benefited in huge ways from that. Just kind of a side gift for us. Youth and children and age group ministries. I've done full-time youth ministry, and my prayer in the creation of the parish was that God would send someone who felt a passion to that and a desire to serve in that way now that I don't. Music is the same way. Dustin's a great musician, and I am not. I like to work with the musicians and get it all pieced together in a way that benefits the full worship experience, but I'm not the musician. So I've got Dustin for that. I know that's one of the things y'all have to do right now. So I wanted to share a couple of the concrete things that we did. For us, it ended up in most of the churches being two representatives that were currently serving on their staff parish committee, and then the church's lay leader, which in some of the settings they were also serving on staff parish. So we have three people from each church who are on parish leadership, parish council, and each church is represented equally. So that's one of the things that's been important, especially if you all are in settings where some of the churches are much bigger than others and there's kind of a potential power play. Everybody, when it comes to sitting around the table, everybody has the same number of faces at the table. And so that's been important for us. And also, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's about finding the right people, not necessarily the loudest, not necessarily the ones who've always had the clout. It is about finding those people who may not be the first ones to come to you after worship on Sunday, but that when they do, their ideas are well thought out. It's people of prayer. It's people who are faithful and visionary and obviously cooperative. We have a lot of teachers and retired teachers on our leadership team. Those personality traits tend to meld well together. It's people who can be enthusiastic, who can articulate vision and who are also willing to try something different. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there. One of our kind of our main Bible study has ended up being almost our whole leadership team. And that wasn't intentional. It's something that's been offered to, across all four churches. And we have some other folks who will join us some. But it's our leaders coming together. And what that also does for them is they feed off of each other in a really positive way. They may, on Sunday mornings, especially in these little settings, feel like they are just kind of the do it all people. But when they come together in Bible study, when they come to parish leadership, they are together with the other folks who can relate to that. And it's just been beautiful to see how that unfolds and that they feel like they've found a leadership community, and it deepens discipleship for them, which has been powerful to be a part of and really just has led to fun conversations as that groups come to know and to trust each other well. And then I'll add, are there specific things in your context and setting that need to be considered? One that we had not considered that ended up being essential was our parish leadership folks have got to have the technological capacity to get on Zoom. And I am in a setting where God blessed us by that just happening. Most of my folks don't email. Most of my folks don't email. A fair number of them text at this point, but are there language components that are important for you to consider? How, when this group comes together, how are they going to work together? Do they need to be available at certain times of the week or in some capacity for in-person gatherings? Just be asking some of those questions so that you don't get someone in and then realize that it's not going to be a good fit for the group. The bishops laid out some of that with getting your trying to figure who's going to be on your parish leadership team, getting the coverage, things like that. But also wanted to throw out some low-hanging fruit possibilities. When I first met with my district superintendent about moving forward with this idea, he kept saying, you need to find your low-hanging fruit. You need to find your low-hanging fruit. And I just thought that sounded cheesy. But in time, I've come to recognize the wisdom in his statement. What is something that your people might be able to get around early on and support, do together, show up for, be a part of, touch lives with, get to know each other, anything. And it can be super simple, but I did put again here that for us, I think a low hanging fruit is making sure, and it's not easy, but making sure that our folks feel cared for, that every church knows that they do have a pastor. It looks different, but there will be someone there in their moment of crisis. And so, however it works to establish that in your setting, I'd encourage you to be looking at that really early on and be thinking, if there's a funeral the first week, who's going to do it and what's that going to look like? And then is there something you could succeed at this summer, whether it's a VBS or some sort of ministry outreach, some sort of Bible study? Are there changes you might make to your signs or to your bulletins or to your PowerPoints of, of sharing the vision of what's happening, of the way that you're cooperating together? Are there ways you can share music? I'll share a great story on this one real quick. A couple of my churches have really struggled with music since COVID. Two of them have not been able to bring their choirs back. They lost too many people, and it just hasn't been the right fit for them. And so for Easter, there wasn't anything in these settings to offer for special music. No anthems, no soloists, nobody to kind of offer that. We've been using a lot of recorded music, even for hymns. It's been a struggle. But my couple that has joined my larger church and been sharing their music gifts agreed to go out to one of my smaller churches and to sing for Easter. And it didn't conflict with them being able to be back and be in kind of their home church at 11. I was asking them to come out for an earlier service, and they've done it since then. Actually, this last Sunday, the pianist had to be out at that little church, and so Andy went out and he played all the hymns and he did all the special music, and he and his husband sang together, and it was powerful. And they felt blessed by the chance that they had to give back. And then they went back and they were in their home church doing their normal thing by 11 o'clock. And so what are just little ways? You have somebody who's great with tech that might be able to help a church that can't remember how to turn the sound system on. I mean, whatever it might be, to be able to get people saying, there's somebody who can help with that now. We're looking out and just growing together in that way. Maybe you just have a kickoff ice cream event, or you meet in a park, or you let the few families recognize that now there's a few more families. There are enough children perhaps for something. Just be looking at what could help you with a quick win. And now, friends, I know that was a whole lot. It was a whole lot of information. That's why I wanted you to have a piece of paper in front of you. Because, friends, I know right now is about the critical just get up and going. Just do what you got to do and get going. But I just encourage you to remember that this is going to be an ongoing process. It's going to be a continual visioning and revisioning, and leave space for the work of the Spirit in the coming months. And I pray that you'll be blessed. I pray that your people will be blessed, and that you will indeed have the chance to multiply the kingdom.